worked as an agricultural researcher at the Waite campus for approximately 20 years, including most recently at the ARC Industrial Transformation Research Hub for wheat in a hot, dry climate. Nick has always been concerned about climate change, but was compelled to do more after attending a Waite Leadership Program in 2018-19. This talk summarises what he has found out after looking into the topic more, regarding actions that people can take personally and potential role of academics and universities in combating this problem. And this seminar is part of the Uni of Adelaide Sustainability Week program, which is happening this week. So Nick will give the presentation, and then we will have a Q&A session at the end of Nick's presentation. But you can enter your questions anytime during this talk by typing into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom page. So I'll hand over to Nick now. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Rebecca and Karen. And I'm really happy to be part of the University of Adelaide Sustainability Week program. So thank you to the organisers there for including me in that. I think we're all concerned about climate change, but a lot of us are really uncertain about quite what we can do about it. So today I'm aiming to present to you a practical information package about what to do and how to guide your decisions on that. And it's fairly similar to the recent documentary on ABC, Saving Planet A, which gives tips about lowering your carbon footprint, and I'm hoping to add on that today. Oh, there we go. So I'll just start with a few declarations. A lot of the steps I'm going to suggest are very personal, so you decide what steps you do or don't take. I don't judge anybody. And I'll be talking about some financial choices, but the comments are really of an ethical nature and not a financial nature. And you really should get professional financial advice to suit your own situation. Likewise, I'm not a dietitian, and I'm likely to get some things wrong here, so any corrections are welcome. So you've probably all heard that to avoid very serious consequences of climate change, we have to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. And to get there, we have to reduce our emissions immediately and then get to net zero by 2050. So this gives us a remaining budget of 580 gigatons of carbon dioxide that we can emit to get there. Which translates to about 2.5 tonnes per person per year remaining budget for the next 30 years. So how does our per capita budget compare to that 2.5? It's terrible, really. Apart from a few Middle Eastern oil producing countries, we're at the top of the pack for per capita carbon footprint per person at 21 tonnes per person per year. China and India are the first and third largest emitting nations, but their per capita emissions are quite low still. And of course, China manufactures a lot of the stuff that we buy and emits in the process. So we're really in no position to expect that any other countries make reductions on their emissions until we get our own house in order. So are we decreasing our emissions as a nation? No, we're not. So according to government projections, in the next 10 years, we're barely going to reduce our emissions at all, if at all. So we'll be nowhere near our Paris target goal for Australia, nor the 1.5 degree straight line pathway. And if we even look at the ethical 2.5 tonnes per capita budget path, we're even further away from that. So our Prime Minister Scott Morrison says we're meeting and beating our targets, but if that's what we're doing, then our targets aren't really appropriate. So what can we do? As individuals, it helps to look at how we contribute to the carbon footprint individually by looking at where those emissions come from. So the good news, I guess, is that we can control most of these things. So things like travelling, car and flying are a big one, as is food, consumer goods and services, the stuff we buy, and also electricity and gas that we use in our house. And amongst those, heating and cooling, appliances and hot water are the top energy consumers, and then a bit for housing as well. And then there's this other category, mining infrastructure, etc., which covers everything else. And we do actually have some control over those things as well through our finances. South Australia's electricity grid is already about 50% renewables, and is fast getting to 100%. It's predicted that it'll get there by 2030. I was surprised to learn, though, that the carbon intensity of the South Australian grid is still a little bit more than that of direct combustion of natural gas. So for something like cooking, in fact, using natural gas is still less carbon intensive than using electricity, but it won't stay that long for very long. It won't stay that way for very long, sorry. So converting everything to electricity is really the only pathway to get to near net zero emissions. And other states are rapidly getting there as well. They're taking on developing renewable power at a high rate as well. So one way we can actually make that go faster is through the way that we purchase our electricity. And there's this great online guide, the Green Electricity Guide, which gives you information about the climate credentials, if you like, of our electricity service providers. So in South Australia, the only one with the top rating is Diamond Energy, and that's who we get our power from in our house. They've got that top rating because they only supply energy through renewables, and they actually produce more energy by renewables than their customers use. The other approach is to purchase green power. So this is a government audited system which mandates an increase in renewable generation proportional to your consumption when you pay a premium on your power bills. So I asked about this in Diamond, since they're already 100% renewables, and they said that probably there was no advantage in getting green power with them. And also I compared the price of Diamond without green power to the other deals, and it's actually similar to the price of the best deal with another company with 100% green power. And it was dead simple to transfer. It only took 2 emails to do it. Home solar, it's really a no-brainer for both reducing carbon emissions and reducing costs. So typically you get a 5-year payback with solar panels, and this is how much it costs for typically for a 6 kilowatt system. Another useful thing to know is that a flat roof angle is still pretty efficient. We have some solar panels on our south-facing roof space, and they're still pretty efficient. Consuming electricity in the middle of the day, it will save you money because you're using more of your own solar, but it won't reduce Australia's emissions. That's because South Australia, even though on some days we produce 100% of our electricity from renewables, we're connected with eastern states via the interconnectors. So whenever we have excess renewable energy, it's transported to the eastern states and then reduces the need for generation by fossil fuels. There's other arrangements you can use to access solar if you don't have roof space to do it. So if you have a shared roof space, say a multi-storey block of flats, you can use community microgrids. You could also purchase equity off-site in off-site solar through solar cloud. And there's also ways that landlords and tenants can share both the costs and benefits of installing solar. And I found a great source of information for all things relating to solar was this website here, solarquotes.com. Home batteries, they don't in fact yet reduce emissions because any solar feed-in that you would otherwise have would reduce the carbon intensity of the grid. And in fact, whenever you charge and discharge the battery, it loses power, some power. However, in the long run, storage, including batteries and pumped hydro and other things, can help in the management of the grid by reducing peak demand, and will ultimately be needed to complete the transition to renewables to be able to cope with the transitory nature of renewable generation, wind and solar. Unfortunately, it's not yet economical for households, but it will get there. So if you get one, it will be costing you, but you're helping to drive down prices for others by increasing economy of scale. So heating and cooling, reverse cycle split systems are probably the best option. They're versatile, so they provide both heating and cooling, and they're 500% efficient, which means that only about a fifth of the useful power you get out with cooling and heating is derived from your electricity supply. And that's because it's a heat exchange system that takes energy from the atmosphere. You should choose the highest Energy Star rating model, and this website here, energyrating.gov.au, is a good tool for identifying the most efficient models, also for other electrical appliances. Evaporative air conditioning is pretty power efficient, but it has disadvantages. So it uses roof space that could otherwise be used for solar panels, and the ducting can sometimes be a source of heat loss during winter. And you need to open your windows or doors for it to be effective, and they're only effective in low humidity environments. Hot water, heat pump is actually a pretty good option. They're a relatively new thing on the market, so it basically operates off the same technology as a split system, and they're also 500% efficient, roughly. Interestingly, it uses the same amount of bought energy as solar systems over a year, either electric or gas boosted. And this particular model that we got recently from Sandon, it has a blockout timer, so you can run it during the middle of the day. It only runs for about 1 or 2 hours for us and only draws about 800 watts. So it's easily covered by our solar supply, so it saves us money. Because of the issue I talked about before, gas-boosted solar may still be the least carbon-intensive option for South Australia at the moment, but won't stay that way for long. Other actions around the home, you no doubt know about the importance of insulation. Can be a really cost-effective way of reducing the power use, and plugging drafts like up chimneys. It's useful to use passive heating and cooling approaches when possible, so things like shading, opening doors to let in air. Get the highest Energy Star rating appliances you can, and if your building keeps the highest possible energy efficiency standard. And I found some really good resources for energy efficiency around the home is this site, Your Home, and also the Renew and Sanctuary magazines. On to transport. This shows some of the options for short to medium range options. So a lot of this information comes from this really great website, Green Vehicle Guide. And there you can look up all of the car models sold in Australia and have a look at their tailpipe emissions. So bike, e-bike, e-motorbike and walking obviously is at the better end of the scale. And then you have plug-in electric cars. So provided that you charge these off green power, they're basically carbon neutral in running costs in running. And then you have things like bus, public transport and interstate coach, followed by plug-in hybrid cars. So these are cars that function some of the time as like plug-in electric cars, but at other times run off the petrol engine. So obviously the better or longer range vehicle we can get that can operate only on battery, the better it is in terms of carbon footprint. And then you have conventional hybrid, and also equal to those is the most fuel efficient small petrol or diesel cars. And then between medium sized petrol cars and a gas guzzler, you actually have flying. So flying is not always the worst option if you're comparing it to single occupancy vehicles. And you can actually use websites like co-seats to organise sharing of rides with people. The new model electric cars that came out just last year, like the Nissan Leaf and Hyundai Ioniq, has a pretty decent range, almost 300 kilometres, but they're really dear, more than 25k dearer than the corresponding new petrol model. So this translates to, together with differences in operating costs as about a net yearly additional cost of almost $5,000 in the first 3 years, and then a little over $3,000 thereafter. So it's a big additional cost. But if you get one, you'll be helping achieve economy of scale, driving down the costs for others, helping the development of charging infrastructure, also bringing a second-hand car on the market. But price parity with petrol cars may come pretty soon. According to Bloomberg, it may be as soon as 2 years from now. But that may be optimistic, so maybe you could wait, and in the meantime, use one of those other options I was talking about, like buying a very small, efficient petrol car. But whatever you do, don't buy a new petrol car, because that'll be on the road for the next 8 years, generating more emissions. E-bikes are an option that we really like in our family. So both my wife and I have got one. These are our trusty steeds here, you can see on the right. Provided you use the power assist, they are lycra, wet and shower free. And I've calculated that we've each avoided about 0.9 tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions per year by using them. My wife really hated the commute into North Terrace every day, but now we really like our commutes and look forward to them because we can avoid the traffic and parking frustrations. You can also have a good time discovering the back streets and bike trails of Adelaide, and there's this really good website tool, called Cycle Instead, which is a route planner for cyclists. You can also buy conversion kits for ordinary bikes to convert them to electric boosted. And I have my bike at the Waite on most days, so if you're at the Waite and want to go, just let me know, and I'll be happy to let you do that. And above all, be safe, particularly if you're getting back on your bike after a long break. It can be a potentially dangerous time, so just be very careful out there on the roads. Next to flying, so it's a bit of a moot topic at the moment, really, because of COVID-19. But long-haul flying is really a very carbon-intensive activity. So you only need to travel return to any of those 3 top destinations, and you immediately blow your ethical budget for the year 2 times over. So we should try to avoid those long-haul flights if possible. And unfortunately, cruise ships are no better in their carbon footprint. So in fact, the only option for travelling overseas and keeping your emissions down would be doing something like going on a sailboat or crewing on a container ship. There was a climate scientist called Peter Kalmus, and he recognised the hypocrisy of many climate scientists saying climate change was dangerous, but still flying all over the world to attend conferences. So he set up this site where you can pledge your commitment to fly less or not at all, called NoFlyClimateSky. And he has a section there for climate scientists, but also for other scientists and ordinary citizens. So I noticed there that nobody yet from South Australia had put their pledge on there. Maybe it's a bit of a meaningless thing right at the moment, but later when we get back to flying again, please consider it. Our goods and services, the stuff we buy, we really need to buy less stuff. Everything that's made has a carbon footprint associated with its manufacturer. It helps to prioritise experiences over material things. And of course, don't forget the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. And you can consider giving to charity instead of buying stuff for birthdays or Christmas presents, particularly for adults, and can be a bit more of a meaningful thing to do. And I want to give a plug for this great charity, Carina, which has started in South Australia. They give interest-free loans to community installations of solar power. That money is paid back and then loaned on again to fund other projects. The carbon footprint associated with your diet is another big one, and they call it the carbon food print. Generally all meat and animal products are more carbon intensive than plant-derived foods. And this is particularly true for red meat. That means sheep and cows. This is because they're ruminants and they have microorganisms in their gut that produce methane gas, which is also a potent greenhouse gas. Some farm crust shrimp can be high in carbon footprint because in Asia they clear mangrove swamps, which are a depository for carbon, and also, of course, those farmed fish and shrimp need food. So you can make a lot of improvements to your carbon footprint of your food by cutting down on meat, not eating red meat, or going vegetarian or vegan. Vegan, of course, is the best option. So can you be healthy with a completely plant-based diet? Absolutely. In fact, it can be a solution perhaps to the epidemic of diet-related non-communicable diseases in the Western world. So things like type 2 diabetes, heart disease and stroke are all reduced by eating less meat and dairy. Protein and general nutrition is not a problem if you eat a variety of nutrient-dense plant-based foods, and also don't eat too many empty calorie foods like white bread and potatoes. Many top athletes are actually vegans or converted to veganism partway through their careers, such as Carl Lewis, Venus Williams, Lewis Hamilton. And a fun documentary on this, you can see it in Netflix if you've got that, called Game Changers. But take care with children under 2 years pregnant or lactating women or people with underlying conditions, and babies should, of course, breastfeed. Other climate-friendly food habits. To avoid food waste helps to make a weekly menu and shop with a list. Compost scraps or put them in the green bin so it doesn't go to landfill and produce methane. Use fresh in-season local produce where possible to cut down on food miles and refrigeration. Of course, growing your own food is a great option, and share some good vegetarian and vegan recipes with friends. So it took me a while to find a good vegetarian veggie burger recipe, but I finally got there. So next, your money. Your money doesn't do anything. Sorry, it doesn't do nothing when it's in the bank. It's out there in the real world doing things, and either it can work for good or for not so good. So your superannuation is a big one. Superannuation funds currently hold about 40% of the equity in the ASX stocks, and that proportion is increasing further, so it has huge leverage. So the initial sale of shares raises capital for companies, allowing them to expand. And super providers also vote in shareholder resolutions, and they're often about policies relating to climate change. Your bank's savings, they can go towards banks provide loans and can provide loans to fossil fuel companies. Your insurance premiums are used to invest as well, and also insure operations. So there's this really good organisation called Market Forces based in Melbourne, and if you go to their website, it has a whole lot of information about the climate credentials of banks, superannuation schemes and insurance companies. So you can move to super bank and insurance that's less harmful. According to this Market Forces site, the best super is Verve, Super Future and Australian Ethical, and I've just recently moved to Australian Ethical. Banks, there's quite a few, Bank Australia and others. Insurance, Huddle for Car and House and Content seem best, and Bupa and others for health insurance. So if you move, make it count by writing to them to say why you're moving. And while you're at it, you can mention the Banking Royal Commission if they were one of the guilty people and organisations, sorry. And this brings with it a certain amount of satisfaction too. I think of it as sticking it to the man. Alternatively, you can stick with your current provider and ask them to invest more ethically. Or you can ask them to vote positively more in climate-related shareholder resolutions. And you can switch to a greener share mix in your super, such as the ones available within UniSuper. So UniSuper was actually the target of a lobbying campaign recently by Market Forces. This is because it has shares in companies undermining the Paris goals, including in the sustainable portfolios. And they've voted against many of the climate change related shareholder resolutions for Australian companies. This year, they rejected calls in a letter backed by over 12,000 members to divest from fossil fuels, although later on they did then announce divestment from several coal mining companies. So they need to improve, really. So I've thought about this a lot and compared with Australian Ethical. It wasn't that easy a decision. So the net returns might be lower in Australian Ethical. That's because it's a for-profit fund, so it has higher fees, although they have performed pretty well on some metrics. So if you leave UniSuper, you can return later, which is a good thing. Neither UniSuper nor Australian Ethical have leaving or set up fees, although there's a modest fee for buying and selling shares in both if you leave or join one of those. So all considered, I decided to move my super from UniSuper to Australian Ethical and told UniSuper I might return if they clean up their act. So super is really important for your future, and you should get proper financial advice before making any important decisions like that. And it's particularly important for young people to get their super strategy worked out properly. The world's population is set to increase by about a third between now and 2050, and obviously that'll make it much more difficult to meet any sustainability targets. So each additional child that we have now can be attributed a carbon footprint to each parent of almost 60 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year. It's so high because it's based on the current emission rates in developing countries, and also takes into account the children of your children, etc. So obviously that's a very personal choice, the size of your family. So voting is very important. Near to the next election, if you're confused about who has the best climate change policies, these three sites here usually list or describe the candidates and parties' policies. And the way the election system works in the lower house, if there's really little point in voting for an unlikely winner in your electorate, but in the Senate, there's more chance of voting in someone from a minor party or an independent. What you can all ask your MP for. At the moment, the federal politicians are talking about a gas-fired COVID recovery plan, which would be disastrous, I think, for the environment. So what about something more constructive, like a comprehensive transition to 100% renewables economy? In fact, there's no other developed country better placed to increase its generation of cheap electricity from renewables, because we have so much space in sun and wind. And we could build our industry and economy on that. Things such as smelting aluminium and steel. And that's well described in Ross Garnaut's book, Superpower. And the transition, of course, is already underway in many parts of the world. So let's use those efforts as a template. And that's, if you want to learn more about that, you can read Jeremy Rifkin's book, The Green New Deal. Right, trying to convince others to act as well. As you're probably aware, climate change is one of those issues that really polarises people. And if you talk the wrong thing, if you say the wrong thing to the wrong audience, you're actually more likely to make them do the opposite of what you want them to. So try to understand who your audience is and speak to their values, i.e. the economy or biodiversity. Secondly, it's really important to normalise action. By that I mean we have to talk about it and actually do something about it every day. And people copy and respect other members of their tribe in what they do and say. So just be aware of that. I mentioned solutions and opportunities, not only problems. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, partly due to vested interests deliberately spreading that. So as scientists in particular, we've got a particular obligation to oppose that wherever we hear it. And if you need to do it, if you're unsure, go away and read up about something and come back with a quality answer later. Yeah, and also if you, just to keep your own motivation up, spend time with other proactive people. There's a really good organisation called Renewable. Before COVID-19, it met quarterly in Goodwood Community Centre. So they're basically a club that discusses and publishes on transitioning to renewables. Hopefully they'll get back to meetings soon. And if you want to discuss this with your family, a good one for families and kids is the book by Mark and Tom Delaney, Low Carbon and Loving It, and you can download it for free at that website. Universities are really important because they're meant to be thought leaders in society, and so we should be leading the way, really, being ahead of the curve. So you're probably aware, University of Adelaide's installed a lot of solar panels at Roseworthy campuses and also on the roofs of our buildings, which is great. Just to keep it in perspective though, that only offsets about a little over 1% of our emissions. So if we were to go carbon neutral, or University of Adelaide, they'd need to purchase either a lot of off-site generation or get offsets or something like that. We had the goal of achieving 15% reduction in energy intensity by 2020, and we looked like meeting that. which is a great start. So previously, when I asked Peter Rathjen whether University of Adelaide was going to divest from fossil fuels in their investments, the first thing he said, well, I haven't seen any students outside of my office asking me for this. So Vice Chancellors do listen to students, and there's been a lot of student-led campaigns for universities around Australia and the world to divest from fossil fuels. And there's one website here that a lot of universities have used to launch campaigns to be divest from fossil fuels. So if anybody from the Adelaide Sustainability Association wants to take this up as a cause, I think that'd be great. So the opportunities going ahead, the next campus sustainability plan for the next decades is being drawn up right now. So get involved and ask for a zero emissions target, for instance, by 2030, I think would be reasonable. If students and academics don't ask for this, then it won't happen. If you're worried about this being a waste of time for your career, I think it's actually consistent with developing your career. So climate change or climate action fits with the criteria for promotion, engagement, service and leadership in the university or community. Also, there's an expectation that professors should be outstanding community leaders and demonstrate the highest standard of ethical practice. And of course, climate change action is really an ethical issue. Other universities in Australia are taking a much stronger stance on climate change. So Adelaide University is being left behind a little bit. So University of New South Wales, University of Melbourne, Monash, ANU are all committing to go carbon neutral or negative. And University of Tasmania is also certified carbon neutral, although Tasmania already has a very green electricity grid, so in a way that was easier for them. And many of the universities now have centres explicitly dedicated to climate change mitigation, research and education. And in many cases, these were funded by significant philanthropic funding. So the universities benefited from that as well. So that's it. I'd like to really thank Carolyn Fazio and the Impetus team for running the leadership course that I attended. My fellow coachees, Uta, Penny, Marmaru and Alison for all the encouragement and advice they gave me, and also the Dragons, Eileen, Steve and Andrew for their encouragement, and also the Waite Hub for funding that training program. Libby Hogarth, the University of Adelaide Sustainable Development Manager, and Vikram Kenjle, our Energy Manager, have always been really good support for me and in providing information as well. So thank you to them. And John Carriger helped with some discussions on food. And last but not least, my family, Sophie and Emma, for putting up with me going off piste a little bit with this topic. Okay, so I'm open to questions now, but if we don't get to your question, you can contact me at this email address. I'd be happy to correspond with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. We've got a couple of questions, but if you'd like to add any more questions to the Q&A box down at the bottom of Zoom, please do that now. The first question is, I heard that there is less carbon footprint for beef in Australia compared with many other countries. Is this true?
Yeah, that's probably true. So feedlot cattle have a much higher footprint than grass-fed beef. So in Australia, most of our cattle are grass-fed, but having a look at the stats on emissions in Australia, methane from cattle or ruminants, I think it makes up about 9% of Australia's total emissions. So even if it's less than in other countries, it's still a very high proportion of our country's emissions.
Okay, the next question, what about the food print of microbial-based food, for example, corn?
Corn, did you say?
Yes, corn spelled Q-U-O-R-N.
I've never heard of that, sorry, so I don't know what that is. I'll have to look into it.
Do we have any more questions from our audience? If you can quickly type them up. Sorry. Next one. Apparently we now have access to a connector for EVs to our house for charging and powering purposes. Will this be a game changer?
So your house already, I don't really understand the question. Yes, certainly you can charge your EV at home. You can charge most EVs off a pretty ordinary 15 amp socket. In some cases, if you've got an old house and your wiring is old, you may need to get a little bit of rewiring done because of the current that these cars draw when they're charging. And you can run it partly off your solar. So yeah, I hope I've partly answered the question. Sorry.
We produce a lot of waste, especially plastic, as a result of research activities. We have some collection points for recycling, but surely there is room for more action.
Yeah, I guess that comes down to education, and even if there's no bin in sight, you should really know that the best thing to do is to put it in plastic recycling bin. And I know that our curbside recycling bins, they don't take soft plastic. So it's important to make sure that you send that to somewhere like RedCycle, which does take soft plastics. And there's a lot of research, I guess, around using waste plastic in some useful way rather than just getting rid of it. I guess we could get more involved in that sort of thing.
What are your thoughts on vegan leather substitutes?
Yeah, I guess that's all actions in the right directions. A lot of the clothes we wear, actually, they have fibres as well, which are from ruminants. So they have, in a sense, a pretty high carbon footprint as well. Vegan leather, I haven't really thought about that much. I guess if the animal's slaughtered and used, we shouldn't waste the leather.
Okay, just to follow up about the EV question, the connector will now allow the car to act as a battery for the house rather than a standalone battery system. Do you have any?
Yeah, okay. So that can be good for actually stabilising the grid as well, or being a substitute for a house battery. But of course, it would have to be plugged in at the right time of the day for it to be useful. So if you're travelling to work, that might be a bit difficult, but I guess you can manage it. I understand that charging stations that can also use the car to as a source of electricity for your house. It can cost up to about $10,000 for one of those units.
Okay, thank you, Nick. That is it for the questions that we've got at the moment. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's important for all of us to know what we can do as individuals to reduce our carbon footprint. This seminar has been recorded and it will be put on the Waite Research Institute website and the Waite Research YouTube page as well. Next week we have another seminar which will be back at 11 o'clock, and Scott Bowden, who's a newly appointed research fellow in the School of Ag, Food and Wine, will be speaking on investigating the genetic regulation of inflorescence, architecture and flowering time in breadweeds. So hopefully you can all join us for that seminar as well. So thank you very much for attending today.